Before you go out into the world and start writing articles for the school newspaper and start interviewing relevant people to your articles, we should discuss just some of the basics of conducting interviews and some of the protocols that you should follow. Interviews are obviously essential to good news writing. You need to be able to talk to a wide range of people. You need to do it well. So there are three main considerations that you want to take into account when you're planning to interview. One is, as I just said, the range. So who are the players that you should really be speaking to at any given time? What are the things that you should ask to get good information? And how can you keep record of the answers that you get to make sure that what you record is absolutely accurate and truthfully representing what the interviewee said? So let's talk about these things. The range is pretty simple. At any given time, for most articles you write for the school paper, you should really be talking to a range of students and adults. A lot of times, what I see with student articles is that the students interviewed in the articles tend to be all from the same grade as the reporter. Don't let that happen. You should try to constantly talk to a range of freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Don't interview your friends unless their role in the story is essential. Try to talk to a variety of students. Go to the lunchroom, talk to them after school, talk to them before school while you're waiting for class to start. You can reach out online, but overall, make sure that you vary it. Obviously, if the article is about something that happened specifically to the junior class, you would want to talk to mostly juniors. That doesn't mean you wouldn't get reactions from other, upper classmen or lower classmen, but underclassmen. But use your judgment there. For adults, same thing. Try and get a range of voices. Now, it's going to depend upon the topic of the article, but don't just talk to students. Don't just talk to adults. If you are, doing a spotlight on a club, you should talk to the students in the club. You should talk to the advisor of the club. So use this as kind of a guide when planning out your interviews. Again, don't speak to only the people that you're comfortable with. You have to go outside of your comfort zone. Once you have done the interview, you want to make sure that you catalog the answers that you got from the people you're interviewing. The best way to do this is to ask the people you're interviewing if you can record them with your phone. If they say that's okay, then record the interview and then transcribe it later into a Google Doc. If they won't allow that, you can take notes by hand. Try to only write down directly word for word what they said when they say something in a way that you think is worthy of quoting them directly. So other times when they're just kind of giving you information, you can bullet it and just take notes kind of on the fly. If they word something a particular way, you can stop them, ask them to repeat it, write it down, make sure it's right. You could ask them, read it back to them, make sure that it's correct. You can go back to them later and have them check it out. But that's a lot more work. Recording it is best. Just ask them if it's okay. You can always go back too. So you might write down your notes, look at it, and realize that you wish you had asked more questions. You could ask for a follow up interview and ask those additional questions. Don't, say, oh, well, I already did it, it's done. Also, something new might happen. And you might want to then say, okay, can I do a follow up interview based on the new thing that occurred between our first interview and this one? So that's who to interview. That is what to do once you've done an interview. One of the big things, though, is how to get an interview. A lot of students just send emails to people and say, hey, can you answer these questions? Then they paste the questions into the email. Don't do that. I do not want you to do that. It's kind of pushy, particularly when you do that to adults. So what I'd like you to do is meet a person in person and ask them if you can interview them. Schedule a time that works for them and for you. That person might say, could you just email me the questions? And then do that. If you can't find them in person, you can email them to set up a meeting to set up an interview. But don't just randomly email people with random questions. It just comes across as pushy. It makes it seem like, you're demanding something of them. And you have to be really polite and kind of develop relationships with people so that they're willing to do these interviews with you. Do not give teachers deadlines. Don't send them emails saying, I have an article due, do this by this day, please. Don't do that. It makes them angry, it causes problems for us. So make sure to follow these protocols. Now, that's how to get the interview. What are some key tips while you're conducting the interview? Everyone seems capable of coming up with good questions in advance, but when I observe students doing interviews, the big problem usually comes up with following up. So you might have 5 questions, and what I frequently see is you just ask the first question, get an answer, ask the second question, get an answer, third question, and so on. Don't do that. You want the 5 questions or whatever, however many you come up with, to be kind of a guideline to the conversation, but not the conversation. What you want to do is get used to listening to their answers and asking for elaboration, asking for clarification, asking for more than what they give you. So these are just some tips for how to do that when you're kind of on the fly during the interview. This is also why live interviews are better than email ones, because you can do that. You can't do that with email. So let me give you some examples of what this live, on the fly, following up and elaboration looks like. This is from a transcript of an interview that 2 of our reporters conducted in 2017. It was during this whole principal hiring controversy. They had had trouble getting the principal to commit to doing an interview with them. They finally got the principal to do it in February or so of 2017. And they really didn't think that they would get so much time with her. So they prepared like the key questions that they wanted answered. But then they ended up getting a whole period with her, and they had to really be on the fly and ask lots of questions, kind of as the conversation developed. And they did amazingly well. Now, this is obviously a more combative interview than you're probably going to have as a high school journalist. Most of these your interviews will not be like this, but I want you to just see how politely and how strongly they're able to kind of ask for clarification, ask for more from the answers. Here, the principal was talking about electives. There was some drama over electives, and she was really adamant about saying that she wanted to change how electives worked at Townsend Harris and make sure that students were able to get more electives that they wanted than they were getting. So this was part of her answer. And Smitha, the reporter, responded by saying, I recall in these meetings that you had with students, you mentioned that you'd want to add courses like AP Art History and AP Chemistry. I know we have a lot of required courses, so would that mean replacing other electives in place of these new classes that you plan to implement? So what she was really saying is, you're saying that you want to add more classes that students want, but if you add more classes that students want, would that take away other classes that students want too? So this is just a really good way to, not just let the answer that the person gave you sit, but really think about what they said and then think about, the next steps if what they're saying happens. What would the ramifications be? And ask about those too. So this is a great follow-up. Here we have another example of that. Mayrose was asking about, so during the kind of dramatic things that happened, they were trying to schedule an interview with the principal, but the principal's secretary kept asking them, are you scheduling a meeting with the principal as a student or as a classic member? And they weren't sure why they were being asked to distinguish between the two, because they're both students and classic members. So they asked the principal to explain why that was necessary. And the principal said, well, if you're meeting me as a student, I need to know about that, because if it's something urgent, then I have to hasten that appointment, meaning I have to make time for you, and I wouldn't necessarily have to make time for you as a reporter, which is a fair answer. But Smitha follows up saying, well, we did just write an article about a senior who told us that it was very difficult to meet with you when she wanted to change her Queens College grade from a C to an A+ on her transcript, because the C was an error. She really was supposed to get an A+. Because you mentioned hastening appointments over here, why did it take so long for you to communicate with her directly and change her grade? So again, this is a great follow-up. Here, the principal's answer is, I can't meet with you as a classic reporter necessarily automatically because if students come to me with problems, I need to make time for them. And then she responds with a specific example of a student who had a problem, and the student claims that the principal didn't make time for her. This is very politely asked, but it's really holding the principal accountable for her answer. So again, you're not always going to be in this situation. Most of your conversations will be much more pleasant than this, but you still want to just look at how these reporters get the interviewee, the person being interviewed, to say more. Always follow up, always ask for clarification, always ask for more, always think about what they're saying, and determine what other information you need from them based on those answers. So those are the basics. There's tons more that we're going to go over, but in class tomorrow, we're going to start thinking, okay, who do we need to interview? How do we contact these people to set up the interviews? And then what are the questions we can plan out in advance, knowing that we still will probably have to come up with more on the fly.